Since ECMAScript 6 was released, many developers removed using var and keyword and started using let keyword, thinking that let is new var. Today I want to show you on examples what are differences between let and var and why you should care about var keyword also. My name is Zura, welcome to my channel. The output of this simple example is the following. We have undefined and then we have 5. Well, why this statement prints 5, I think this is clear. But why this statement prints undefined, if it's not clear for you, you can check my video about hoisting and you can find the link in the description below. But what happens here, how this code is interpreted, is like this. First, variable is declared, then console log is called, then 5 is assigned to A, and then another console log statement is called. So this code is interpreted like this. And that's why this outputs undefined and 5. What happens when we replace our var keyword with let? We have an error. On the first line, when we try to print A, we have an error. A is not defined. That's because variables declared using let keyword are not hoisted. Engine doesn't know that the variable exists actually before the variable is declared. That's one and really important difference between declaring a variable using var versus declaring a variable using let. When you're about to replace your variables declared using var with let keyword, you should be careful about this. Another example is scoping. When variable is declared using var keyword, it has function scope. If it's not declared in the function, then it has global scope, meaning that the following code will print 5. That's because the variable is declared already on the first processing of the code, and the code is interpreted like this. And then if statement is evaluated, 5 is assigned to A, and A is printed, and that's clear that this is 5. When you declare a variable using let keyword, it has a block scope. And in this example, block is the body of if statement. Block starts here and ends here. And variable A actually exists only in this block scope. And after if statement is finished, A doesn't exist anymore, and this code now gives us error again. I have often met code something like this. If some condition, then var A is 5, else var A is 6. So developers check something, and if this something is trueable, then they declare and assign variable 5, and otherwise they assign something else. And then they use this new A. If A is now 5, then I'm gonna do some action like add something to cart. If it's not 5, then send email or something like this. It doesn't matter actually what they are doing, but they may be doing some really important things. And this code is valid code, and this works fine. And as far as we have true in if statement, we add something to cart. But as soon as you replace your variables, your var keywords with let, you have big problem. you have an error again because this A is created in this scope and dies in this scope, in this block scope. Another A is created in else scope and dies at the end of the else scope. So A outside of this if statement doesn't exist. It's not even declared. And we have an error when we try to compare A with something. We definitely have an error and we have a problem. So be careful when you're about to replace your var keywords with let. And don't listen to someone who tells you that let is a new var in ES6. var, declaring a variable using var, has a function scope. If it's not declared in function scope, it has global scope. But declaring a variable using let has a block scope. And you can have explicit blocks. We have blocks like this in if statement, we have blocks in for loops, and we can have explicit blocks. Another example, var in for loop. The following code will print 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Well, why this prints 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? It's clear because we are iterating from 0 to 4 and we print I. And at the end of this for loop, I still exists because I has now a function scope, but in this case we don't have function, so this has global scope. This is something like var I and I equals 0. And at the end of the for loop, I still exists. It was incremented to 5. 5 was compared to 5, so the condition wasn't satisfied, and for loop was finished, and then we print I at the end of this for loop. That's obvious. One important challenge about closures is like this: set timeout function console log I after 1 second, or I multiplied on 1000. What happens here? Here we have 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. First, this 5 is printed. This example is one of my examples about closures. If you don't know exactly how closures work, you can find the link in the description below about closures. And the solution of this following code is either wrap this set timeout in an immediately invoked function expression like this, and by doing this you create a new scope, and you need to pass your I variable here and get it here. Again, if you don't understand, if this code is not clear for you, you can leave comments below, or you can check my video about closures. If you still not understand, just feel free to leave comments below. The following code, this code actually fixes our problem, and we now print, let me delete this last console log statement. We have now correct output, what we want. Another and much more simple solution is to declare a variable here using let I, and we don't need this function. And the reason is that when we have function declared using var, it is declared in the global scope, and in this code we actually have only one var, only one I variable. And if we remove this function, the same I variable is printed 5 times after a couple of seconds. So this, as far as the same I is printed and this for loop is finished after several microseconds, then the I is 5 for all set timeout functions. So wrapping inside function is a solution, because here this I, which is an argument of the function. This means that new I is created every time when this immediately invoke function is executed, and this new I is passed here in this console log statement, and thus this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But as I mentioned, simpler solution will be to declare a variable using let, and just this is. So let, declaring a variable using let, creates its own scope, and the scope is now for scope. The scope for I starts here and ends here. Thus, every time this function is executed, it calls I for its own scope. We actually created 5 different I variables. And last example is like this. When we use Iffy, immediately invoked functions, sometimes people call these anonymous functions. Well, actually they are anonymous functions, but anonymous function is function when it doesn't have a name. We can actually give it a name like Iffy or something, and this function still will be an immediately invoked function, but it's not anonymous anymore because I gave it a name. But that's not the main point right now. The main point is that sometimes developers create these Iffy functions to hide their variables and functions for outside scope. So they are doing some code here, then they want to do something and drop it inside Iffy, and then they run another code here. And my a variable and my fn variable is not visible outside of the scope. Even if I declare a variable using function declaration, not function expression, my functions are not visible outside. So let me demonstrate this for you. A, then we have fn and fn2. So first of all, this a is the first error. Actually what we have is error on a. So a is not available at all, and if we comment a, we have an error on fn. If we comment fn, we have an error on fn2. Okay, as far as variables declared using let keyword has its block scope, we can actually take this function, delete and replace it with just explicit block. This is a block, and we can replace our variables declared with var keyword with let. Var has a function scope, let has a block scope, meaning that in this following code, a is now available because a is actually hoisted at the top here, and also fn and fn2 functions are hoisted at the global scope. We don't have any more function scope here, we have block scope, and a, fn and fn2 are hoisted at the global scope. So this will give us 5. But if we replace our a variable and our fn variable, var keywords, we have problem about a. So it's not actually a problem at this point because we expect it like this. So we want this a to exist only in the scope. We want to hide it for the outside scope, so a is not available anymore. So that is absolutely okay and good. The point is about function declarations, and function expression works in exactly a similar way. So we don't have fn anymore again. Fn doesn't exist outside of this block scope because we declared it with a let keyword. About fn2, as far as this is function declaration, this is not function expression, and we don't mention let keyword here at all. The function exists outside of this block scope. the function has, in this case, global scope. But there is one really important thing what you need to know. The fn2 exists outside of this block scope, and we call it here, and we have this test2 here. Actually, we don't need it inside console log, we can write it here. So we have these tests too, but one important thing that if we try to call this function outside of this block scope before the block scope, we have problem. We cannot call it because fn2 at this point is undefined. fn2 is not a function. It's undefined. We can also print type of fn2, which will be undefined. The reason is that we need to print type before we call fn2. Undefined. The reason is that the identifier fn2 is hoisted and is declared at the top, but the function itself is hoisted in the block scope. So in this case, the code is interpreted like this. We have var fn2, and here fn2 is function which has this body. So the fn2 variable identifier itself is in the global scope, and we execute it here and it works fine, but the function body itself, the function itself, is assigned to this identifier at the beginning of this block scope. Thus we cannot call this fn2 before this block scope, but we can call this fn2 function at the beginning of this scope, like here, for example. fn2 test2, hide some variables, run another code, again test2. I hope this explains how let keyword works. It is not a new version of var keyword, it's absolutely different in terms of scoping and hoisting. So you need to know hoisting and scoping well after you start replacing your variables declared with var keyword with let. If you like the video, click on the like button. If you want to see more videos from me, click on the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. See you in the next time.